the Estes Viking model rocket is one of the most versatile on the market today. And if you've never built one of these, I highly recommend doing so. In fact, build a few of them, because as you can see in the instructions here, there are lots of different configurations. So you can build this as a 3-fin, a 4-fin, or a 5-fin rocket, and the fins are such that you can turn them in just about any direction and they'll still be stable. Now, they do recommend that you always keep your fins going all in the same direction to maintain stability, but there are even possibilities of using multiple fin configurations on the same rocket, and they can still be stable, although you do need to make sure and check that before flying them. So there are at least 18 different configurations, more than what are shown here. But what if you had 2 Viking rocket kits? Well, my local hobby store a little while ago had a clearance sale on the educator packs of Viking kits. And so it was 12 kits, 2 a box, and each box was less than $15. So I was paying about $1.20, $1.50 per rocket, and now I've got a whole bunch of rockets. Well, I am going to use some of them for education, but the thought occurred to me that we could actually do some experimentation with these as well. So in the next several videos, I'm going to look at different ways that we can combine 2 Viking model rocket kits to make a single rocket. Now, anytime you do this, you don't have the guaranteed stability that a pre-manufactured kit has. So you'll want to make sure and check very closely the stability of your rocket before you fly these. All of these that I'm going to show in this series of videos have been flown artificially in RockSim and have been shown to be stable. However, always check this yourself. Differences in building techniques, in glue and paint and such, could result in different results than what I got. Now, I am going to limit myself to what's in each kit. I'm not going to bring in any outside parts, with one exception. Okay, the kits come with streamer recovery, and you would think, well, okay, if I put both streamers in for a bigger kit, that'll still work. And in some cases it does, but not in all. In a few cases, the rocket may be heavier enough, or it may just simply be kind of awkwardly gangly and have lots of parts sticking out, that streamer recovery will not bring it back safely. And I will show a few instances where I replace the streamer with a parachute. But otherwise, we're going to go with the stock parts. Now, one other thing to be aware of, depending on how old your kits are and how long they've been sitting on the shelves, they may come with a plastic nose cone, which is the modern one, or a balsa nose cone, which is found in older kits. Now, as I was going through my kits, I actually found several that still had the balsa nose cone. For the most part, this won't make any difference, but again, be sure to check stability, because as you can see, they are of slightly different lengths, and they're also slightly different masses. So always check that before you fly. And with that, we'll proceed to this build. In this portion of the Viking project, we're going to take 2 Viking kits once more and make a 2-stage rocket out of them. Now, if you've never built a Viking before, I suggest you build 1 or more of them before trying to attempt this, just so you'll be familiar with all of the parts and such. Alright, so I'm going to check this Viking out, make sure we've got everything we need. And as I've mentioned in some of the other videos, sometimes the nose cones differ a little bit from kit to kit. So I'm going to check the nose on both of these. For this build, we're only going to use 1 nose cone, but if I had different ones here, I might separate them out differently. In this case, they're the same nose cone. Now we will need, first of all here, the engine spacer. And what we're going to do here is start off by mounting the engine block in here the same way that we would in any Viking. But we're going to use a little bit more engine overhang than usual. So usually we leave about 1/2 centimeter here. For this one I'm going to use a full centimeter. And that way when the engine is put into here, it will help hold the booster stage in place. The booster stage we're going to construct from a part of the second rocket's body tube, and then the remaining part that we don't use in the booster will attach to the front of the main body tube, elongating it out, and if we want to, making a small payload section. So my first step is to mark 1 centimeter from the end of the engine spacer here. And then I'm just going to get a little bit of glue here and an applicator. And what I'm going to do is simply measure here from the tip to that mark and mark my thumb there. And now I'm going to get some glue. Alright, recheck my thumb mark, and then I'm going to put this into the aft end of the rocket and smear it around in there, and that way the glue should only be around where the thrust ring needs to go in, or engine block, synonymous names there. Alright, now I'm going to push this in till I reach my mark, and then quickly bring that out so we don't get it stuck. And I'm also going to now mark this as the aft end so that I don't accidentally start working on the other end. Now for the booster stage, what we're going to do is use the other thrust ring, and that will hold the booster engine in. And so this will go flush with the aft end of the booster stage. Now I'm not going to glue this yet as we still need to cut it. Okay, but that'll just go in right like that. And then we're going to leave enough room in here so that the booster engine will be in here, and then remember we left 1 centimeter hanging out of the sustainer, and so we need to leave a 1 centimeter space in this as well. So I'm going to take my thrust ring out first of all, measure it. Alright, it is 1/2 centimeter long. The entire booster engine is 7 centimeters long, so 7.5, plus we need 1 centimeter for the engine in here that'll be hanging out. So a total of 8.5 centimeters. So I'm going to measure that on my other tube here. And now I'm going to cut the tube off at that point. The easiest way to cut a tube nice and straight is with this little tool made by Estes. It comes in a set for standard body tube sizes. If you don't have one of these, you can also simply wrap a piece of heavy paper around the entire circumference here at your mark, and that will give you a guide as well. But this fits on like this. So you just slide it to wherever your mark is, and then the other half slides on the other direction, and then as you do a final compression here, that locks it into place. And now you simply take your hobby knife and just cut around And you brace the side of the blade against the cutting guide here. Okay, so here's our booster section. And I'm going to turn this so that even though my cut edge is pretty straight, it's still going to be toward the bottom here, and that gives me two factory edges to come together where the two stages will meet. Okay, so if I've done this right, if I take the other engine spacer here, put it inside, okay, tuck that down, and then put the engine spacer for the sustainer here in, push the whole thing in, alright, and then here you can see there's just enough room for that engine block. Alright, so now I just need to put this in. Now this is going to be a little unusual because even though I need the engine block just right here on the end, I'm going to insert it from the other end so that the glue that I put in here, any excess will get pushed to the outside and not to the inside where it could cause an engine to hang up. So here again, I'm going to go ahead and use an applicator. Okay, and so I'm going to mark the aft end of my booster as well, just so I don't get confused later. Alright, now I can get my glue and an applicator here. And here I'm going to be very careful. I don't want to get that glue any farther down than the actual thrust ring's width. Okay, now this will kind of squirt out the end, but that's easily cleaned. Okay, so now I'm going to take my thrust ring, put it in the other end that I did not glue, and I'll use my engine spacer here to push this up, and I'm just going to continue pushing it until I reach the very end here. And now I'm just going to take a tissue to wipe off that excess. Okay, and then I can take my engine spacer back out and allow this to dry. While I'm waiting for the glue to dry on the engine blocks, I'm going to move ahead to the fins. Now, if you've made a Viking before, you'll know that the fins come on this cardboard stock, and you have to go through and cut all the little nubs off here that the die cutter left behind in order to free these. Now, since I've built quite a few Vikings over the years, I have a whole bunch of spare Viking fins already. So instead of cutting those ones out of the cardstock there, I'm just going to find fins that are still in good condition. It's got a little stuff on them. And for this, I'm going to use a 3-fin configuration on both the booster and the sustainer. So I'm going to need a total of 6 fins. And I'll just save the other ones for yet another project. Okay. Now, again, if you've built Vikings before, you'll know that you need to sand off these nubs. And you want to do it carefully because this is still cardboard after all. So I'm going to first go through and just sand them all flat, and then I'll go through and sand down these ridges that form as we're doing it. Now, after we sand the edges down flat, to remove the ridge here, I'll just use some more sandpaper on a sanding block or a sanding tee like this one, and just gently smooth those out. And I'm using extra fine grit sandpaper, 220 grit, for all of the sanding on the cardboard here. I think with most coarser grits, it's just going to tear up the cardboard too much. So just be a little bit patient. Take off a little cardboard at a time. And then by the end here, you'll have a fin ready to glue on. Now, as to the extent of how far you want to blend in the little nubs here with the rest, that's kind of up to your personal preference. You at least don't want them sticking out beyond the edges here. But then you're still going to have a little bit of stuff on the side that you may have to sand down. And how close you get to that and how much time you spend doing that is entirely up to you. Some of the little indentations and such from the die cutting process can also be filled in with primer when you go to paint it. So I'm going to continue doing these and come back after I have all the fins sanded. My engine blocks have dried enough that we can work with the tubes now. And we're going to mark the tubes for 3 fins each. Now, you may notice that this set of instructions has a little bit different tube marking guide than one of the previous ones did. And it's part of the reason for this is this kit has been around for a long time, and I think I have at least 3 different batches of them. And so one of the things you may notice here is it shows a launch lug being mounted between 2 fins, which is fairly common in modern kits. In some of the older ones, though, it will show a launch lug simply being mounted right alongside a fin. And in the stacked Viking video, that's the way that particular kit showed, and I used it. In this case, I'm only going to use one launch lug. I won't apply one to the booster, and so I won't need to worry about it. So I'm just going to place my tube here, and then mark it with 3 fins. Like so. And now for my sustainer, again, make sure I have the aft end here. And this one I will include a launch lug on. Alright, and now you'll need to extend these. I've got this handy tube marking guide, also made by Estes. But if you don't have one of these, a door frame works really well. And so here I'm just going to extend my lines up. And they just have to go up beyond the root edge length of the fin. Okay, now this one is my launch lug line. I'm going to extend it halfway up the tube. Actually, no, this one's the launch lug line. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to mark that so I don't confuse myself again. And you can either make a mistake like this, just erase it. You already know you have to. Okay, so that's all marked. And then I'm going to do the same thing here with the booster stage. And here I'm going to go ahead and just mark this all the way along the length, and then any excess I can erase later. It's just simpler this way. I have my body tubes marked and we're ready to put the fins on. For this particular rocket, I'm going to use this configuration of the fins, so the kind of a low angled inward configuration on the upper stage, and then more of a delta configuration on the booster stage. And like you've seen in my other videos, I'm going to use this tacky glue method. So I'm just going to put a bead of glue on a fin. And then, making sure I'm on a fin line here, I'm just going to briefly put that on and bring it back out again. And now I'm going to let this set for about 60 seconds and then put the fin back on. 60 seconds have passed, so now the glue has become just a little bit tacky, and this will allow me to place this on, and it will stay in place pretty much by itself. Now, something else you can do while you're doing this is go ahead and place the engine spacer back in here, and that just gives a little more stiffness to the tube while you're working with it. And you just want to make sure you don't glue it inside. So I'm going to continue around with the other two fins on the sustainer and then do the same thing on the booster. And then when we come back, we'll put on the launch lug. While I'm waiting for the fins to dry, I'm going to go ahead and assemble the nose cone. And so here we just need a little bit of thick plastic cement. I'm just going to run a bead around the inside here really quickly. And then put the base of the cone on there. And once it's in, I'm just going to give it a little twist back and forth to seat it well. And just like that, that part is done. The next thing I'm going to do while the fins are still drying is attach the shock cord. And here I'm going to use the slit method rather than the glue-in method that the instructions call for, simply because there's less material for the streamer to get caught on this way. And so here I'm going to put two slits in, and the actual distance here is not critical as long as you're down below the shoulder of the nose cone, but about 2.5 to 3 centimeters. I'm just going to put in a little slit that's just a little bit longer than the width of the shock cord, and then I'm going to go down 1 centimeter or so and put another one in. Alright, and then I can just twist my knife in there a little bit to widen those. And now I'm going to press down on the cardboard a little bit between the two slits to form a little channel or indentation there. Alright, now I'm going to take my shock cord and just ease that in. And here you can use a little dowel. A pencil tip will also work well, so like with this. And if this is too difficult, then just you need to open up that slit a little bit more. Okay. There we go. And we're just going to run that in. This just takes a little bit of patience. And then depending on how skinny your fingers are, you can reach down inside there and pull it through. If you have thicker fingers, you may have to keep poking it through with your pencil a little bit longer. Oh, almost got it. There we go. Alright, so I'll put that about halfway out. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the lower slit. And we need to make sure there aren't any twists in here because the shock cord needs to lay flat against the body tube in that little channel we're making. Alright, so now I'm going to poke this one in as well. Now this one will be a little bit more difficult to feed through simply because it's down lower in the body tube, and the other end of the shock cord can get in the way as well. So I'm just going to poke this through. There we go. Alright, and so now I'm just going to make sure that that's coming down. So this, you may have to look and make sure, but you want to take now the lower part, the one that's going through the lower slit there, and now we're just going to tie a knot in the end. And then another over that, so a double knot. And I'm trying to make my knot as small as possible so we don't have a lot of overhang there, while also making it large enough that it prevents the shock cord from pulling through. Okay. And now just to kind of lock that in, I'm going to work in a little bit of glue. And once this dries, this will just help keep the knot from unraveling. And now I'm going to cut off most of that loose end right there. Okay, now I can take the upper end of the shock cord, pull on it. Okay, and so now that's locked in there. You can see there's a little bit of the knot down in there. Okay, and now I'm just going to take my glue again here, and I'm going to put a little dab of glue under there and let it squirt out. It looks all messy, but that's okay. I'm going to work that down into the two slits and around the shock cord. And now I'm going to let that dry. Now it's going to bulge out just a little bit there. And what I like to do is just take a self-adhesive decal and cover the shock cord with that. And that'll hide the little bulging area as well as providing some additional anchoring there. The other thing we can do while we're waiting for fins to dry is to prepare the upper portion here for mating to the lower portion. Now I'm going to describe something here. I'm not going to build it on this model, but if you would like, you could, instead of mounting the shock cord on the upper portion of the extension tube, you could mount the shock cord down here on the sustainer body tube, and then instead of ejecting the nose cone out the end, you could eject off this entire section here, which could be set up as a very small payload section. To do that, instead of using the engine spacer to couple the two tubes here, you would use the engine spacer to make a bulkhead. And to do that, you would need to cut out from some of the waist area here of the fin stock 2 circles, okay, so 1 for each end, and then glue those onto the ends very well, and then you'll need to sand around the edges so they pass through easily, and then you'll need to attach the other end of the shock cord here to that bulkhead. Now, the reason I'm not doing this is because part of the challenge I made to myself here was that I would not use anything that did not come in the kits. And to really do this well, what I would do is to string some Kevlar line from the forward bulkhead all the way through here through the aft bulkhead, make a loop, bring it back up, and tie it off. And that would give a very strong anchor point to which you could put the shock cord. Okay? So if you want to do that, it's only cheating a little bit, but you could certainly do that, and that would allow you to split the rocket for ejection rather than having it come out the nose cone. And that's mostly a matter of aesthetics, although if you want to put a little tiny altimeter in the payload section, it's safer for the altimeter than if it's in a region that's going to be exposed to exhaust gases or ejection gases. Okay, so for this, I'm just going to add the extended tube to the sustainer. So here again, I'm going to need to measure this. So it's 7 centimeters long. We're going to make a line here at 3.5. And so that will be attached here. And now I just need to add a little bit of glue. And so I'm just going to smear some glue all around the inside. And then place this in, give it a little turn back and forth as I go. And now I can allow this to dry while my fins are still drying. And by the time we get all this stuff dry, we'll be able to put on the Launch Lug, put the body sections together, and apply the fin fillets. My fins are dry enough to handle now, so I'm going to apply the Launch Lug. So just move the booster out of the way. And according to the instructions, they mount the Launch Lug at 5 centimeters from the base of the main body tube here, and I'm going to go ahead and use that same dimension. That's going to be right about there. And the placement doesn't have to be exact. And so I'm going to glue this in kind of the same way we did with the fins, although we don't need to let it get tacky because there's not a lot of leverage on this. It's all goobered up though. Okay, so I'm going to glue this on pretty much the same way we did with the fins, except we don't need to wait for it to get tacky. There's not a lot of leverage working against it. So I'm going to put that right along my line. I just need to make sure it's nice and straight. And now we do some more hurry up and wait as we allow this to dry. While we're waiting for the Launch Lug, I'm going to go ahead and apply fillets to my booster stage fins. So I'm just going to add a bead of glue, smooth it out with my finger, and the excess glue I can put onto the next fin. And as long as you have a place where you can keep this horizontal while the fillets dry, you can do all the fillets at once. You don't want to set it vertically in either direction because the glue can run and you'll end up with a fillet that's thicker on one end than on the other. Okay, and just with the fingertip you can clean up the edges as you need to. Alright, so now I can set this aside and let it hurry up and dry. My fillets are still partly wet and are drying here, but I've got them on both the booster and the sustainer now. And at this point, I'm not going to do a final assembly because I want to paint the booster and sustainer stages different color, and also the upper portion of the sustainer a different color yet, as well as the nose cone. So I'm not going to make any permanent assemblies here, but the way this should all go together is when this has been painted, we'll glue the inside of the body tube and apply that. And then we'll also attach the shock cord to the nose cone. And I'm going to end up using both of the streamers, one from each package, and those can just be taped onto the shock cord near where it attaches to the nose. You don't need to necessarily put a separate line on for that. Now, if the double knot down inside of here is interfering with the proper ejection of the streamers, you can go in and cut it down a little bit, because by then this should be well dried into place. If you can, go ahead and still leave a little bit on the inside there. All right, then the nose cone will go on, and then we would have an engine in here, and also one in here, and then that would go in place like this. And it doesn't matter if you have it canted, or if the fins are parallel or opposite, although you can't go completely opposite, you have to cant them a little bit in order for the launch rod to clear here. A last word about loading engines in this rocket. If you've made Vikings before, you'll know that the engine is simply held in place by friction, and usually you have to add a little bit of masking tape to that. Okay, and you want that good and firm, but not so tight that you can't get the engine back out. Now, something to be very careful of here is we don't want any masking tape on this part of the engine that's going to be mating with the booster here. So that's going to go in there, and probably you're going to want something with a relatively long delay charge because this will go up high. For the bottom piece here, the engine's going to load from the top, all right, and then it's going to bump up against that lower engine block there. Now this is a spent engine, which is why it looks all nasty there. And this uses direct staging. So we have to have direct contact between the two motors here. And you can assemble this all before you put the final engines in. Okay, so this is going to be my upper stage engine for this theoretical launch. If you have it, you probably even want an A85. Now, according to RockSim, using an A80 booster does not get the model moving fast enough to keep it stable. And so I recommend using a B60 in the lower stage for the first flight, and either an A83 or, better yet, an A85 in the upper stage. Now, to put these two together, we're going to need a little bit of cellophane tape, and we'll use that to join these two. And then we can also add a little bit of masking tape down in about the middle of the booster here. Not necessarily as much as we'd put in the sustainer. Okay, and so now I'm going to insert this into the sustainer first. Make sure you got the engines pointing in the right direction. Alright, and then I'm going to add my booster stage thusly. And so right now, mainly what's holding the two together is that piece of cellophane tape that's going around. Now when this stages, the hot gases from the booster are going to get pushed directly up against the propellant of the sustainer, And that little bit of heat and pressure will easily break the cellophane tape. That will drop this away without the cellophane on it. And then the sustainer will continue to go. Okay? And then you'll be able to recover both pieces. The booster stage simply tumbles down. I recommend doing this where you've got a nice grassy field, simply because if this hits pavement or hard-packed dirt or gravel, you will have a better chance of knocking one of these fins off. So if this is going to land in something soft, you have a better chance of keeping it intact. And with that, I hope you have a successful launch and a great flight.